How many employees?
About 120.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a good sized operation. Spread around 3 locations, but we're a statewide network, so it's it's a good workforce.
And the annual budget?
Annual budget this year is about $19 million.
Okay. And to get to the point, one of those we wanted to talk about, what portion of that comes from the feds?
So in this year's budget, and remember the federal funding was eliminated while we were in this budget year, so this year's budget has 12% of our funding assigned to the federal grant, which is now gone, and that's what we're trying to make up. But it's about 12% of the budget.
Yeah. So that's
$2.5 million.
$2.5 million.
$2.5 million.
And the rest comes from some state money, from grants, and member donations.
By far the biggest piece of public broadcasting support and Maine public support is individual giving. There's also corporate support, which is those sponsorship messages you see on the air, which are different from commercial television commercials, and foundations, major gifts, philanthropists. We do get a state appropriation that is all about our infrastructure and our vast network across, and that's about 9% of our budget.
Right. In your 4.5 years here, have you seen, this current federal issue aside, have you seen significant growth in donations?
Actually, yes. I mean, I think I am so coming to Maine, I've learned a lot about Maine has a very strong sense of place. There is a lot of affection for Maine public as a statewide organization, and I would say really across the spectrum. It is not a certain kind of thing. But yes, I've seen membership growth, individual giving growth, and there are a couple of things going on. We've expanded some programming, no doubt. Even the funding crisis of the past year, even just the whole political nature of things, has raised awareness of who we are and how much people appreciate our news coverage. So they've supported that. And we also have this capital campaign going on for our new facility. And anytime you have a capital campaign, even if people aren't supporting the building specifically, it makes them more aware of what's going on and wanting to support the program.
So it amps up your other fundraising.
A capital campaign it helps your regular fundraising as well.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in the capital part on the new project in a moment. So when the new administration came in and the new Congress, and it's no secret that a number of Republicans in the past have been critical of public broadcasting, or at least of funding it.
Yeah, but I want everybody to understand it's not a Republican-Democratic thing, because we have had a broad bipartisan support through the years. You say a number of Republicans have been critical. A number of Republicans are also very supportive of public broadcasting, especially their local stations. It is this administration's sort of singular focus on it that has made it the issue that it is in the past year. But for a long time, a lot of Republican support, especially because they understand the importance of their local stations and the importance of rural service.
Right. And you've survived for a decade.
Exactly.
When this talk first started, early last year, how worried were you that the cut would actually happen?
I think it's fair to say that I didn't really expect it to go through. I thought, you're always aware that there's a risk, and but this administration's focus on including public broadcasting in a broader cut. The rescission bill was basically $8 billion about international aid and $1 billion about 2 years of public broadcasting. They really made it a focus. I did think that the supporters and the friends we have on both sides of the aisle in Congress would be able to stave off, to prevent the rescission bill, because rescission is, after all, it's a whole civics lesson. We learned in the past year what rescission means. It means clawing back money that was already appropriated. Rescission is a rare thing, and the fact that they made it work this year, I do think surprised me. I mean, I could see that it was coming, but up to the night of the vote, even the night of the vote, I didn't think it was really going to happen because it really came within just a couple of votes.
Pretty painful for you and the others here to see that.
That was actually, it was a painful evening, and I think our friends of public broadcasting in Congress thought they had it won that night. And frankly, I do believe I think it's pretty accepted that the president and the administration twisted some arms to make sure it went through. By the way, there are Republican members who have said, well, I changed my vote because I was promised there would be something in the future, especially for local stations.
Yeah.
So
haven't seen that yet.
Not yet.
Yeah. So you're in a situation now where Corporation for Public Broadcasting has been shut down. PBS still operates, right? NPR still operates. And technically, they're separate entities.
Absolutely. The announcement of CPB folding, dissolving, going away is, it's sad for me in public broadcasting. I have a lot of friends at CPB. There's such a history of what CPB has done. But it provoked so much concern and confusion among the public, among listeners and viewers, because they think, oh, Corporation for Public Broadcasting is going away. I won't have my PBS and NPR. It's very important to understand the role of each of these. PBS is public television. NPR is public radio. CPB has been the funding mechanism. Congress gives CPB an appropriation. CPB took that money and distributed it to local stations. Local stations are really the fourth or the most important piece of this. The irony of the rescission and the elimination of federal funding is, a lot of the rhetoric was targeted at NPR. Oh, we're not going to fund NPR. This money for the most part, didn't even go to NPR. This money went to local stations, and local stations in various ways pay their NPR dues. But the federal funding went to local stations. So the irony is that even though all the rhetoric was targeted at NPR, who got hurt was the local stations.
So those national entities, NPR, PBS, are still operating.
Yep.
Essentially the same way you do now. They're operating on individual foundation and corporate support.
Well, so what I would say, everybody is still operating. PBS and NPR at a national level, and local stations are still operating. What I'd be hesitant to say is the same way. It's not business as usual. We are in an evolving financial model, frankly. So PBS and NPR, their biggest source of, at their core, PBS and NPR are member organizations, and all the stations are members. So we pay dues. It's like being part of a club. We pay member dues to PBS and NPR, and in return we get their programming. Right. And stations pay those member dues with the money they raise locally. I always stress the government funding, in my mind, the government funding is more about universal access and getting transmitters on the air. The programming is paid by your local membership fundraising. So viewers and donors, viewers and listeners like you are where the funding comes from to pay PBS and NPR for their programs.
That said, that federal support was still very important to all of you.
It's the seed funding. I mean, federal support of public broadcasting. Public broadcasting has been the greatest public-private partnership because it leverages federal funding 7 times over. Federal funding's been about 15% of the system. Like we say, 12% in Maine. For some stations it's more, for some it's less. But basically, a local station takes their $1 of federal funding and leverages that into $7 or $8 of local support. It's a tremendous public-private partnership, and that is the part that we're now adjusting to. That seed funding that gets you on the air is not there anymore, right, and you're having to make it up.
And before I get into how you folks are doing, I do one question. Have you've been with public broadcasting now for what, 20 years?
Yeah, it's getting close to 30, unfortunately.
There you go.
Yeah.
Time goes by. Was it inevitable that at some point you'd have to wean yourself off of government support?
Was it inevitable? Absolutely not. It is a very good investment. It's a very good public-private partnership. There are some things that this country does that just don't exist in only a commercial environment. And public broadcasting, I would argue, and it has been a very good investment of federal support. So no, it wasn't inevitable by any means.
Even in the world we're in now that has so many sources of programming.
So I think it's absolutely fair to have a conversation about should federal funding still be part of a public broadcasting service. I don't mind having that conversation at all, and I can justify why I think it is, but we're moving on without it at the moment. It's a fair conversation to have, but the fundamental reason for public broadcasting that I think people who say, oh, there's so much programming out there, doesn't matter. What you lose sight of is two things: universal free access and the public service mission. So federal funding is there to get a service everywhere in the country, including rural areas that aren't supported by a commercial marketplace. So that's one, and a lot of people forget that. Especially if you're somebody who can afford your cable subscription and you have all the streaming services you want and all that, you may lose sight of how important free universal service is to a lot of people. And the second part of it is the public service mission. Is there value in having content that is not driven by a commercial imperative, by ratings, by selling advertising spots, that's there for public service? I think there's still value in that. I think the programming and the information and the journalism we provide is about what we think the public benefits from rather than what we think will sell commercial time. So I still think that universal access and public service are things worth supporting, and why I don't think the elimination of government funding is inevitable or required, but I acknowledge that that's a fair conversation to have.
Yeah. And if it is going to happen, it would be a lot better to have a gradual off-ramp than chop.
You asked earlier if I saw this coming or if I knew this was going to happen, and I was more optimistic that it would not. But I also thought, because the one other serious time this was challenged in the past, there was a lot of talk about glide path. We're not going to cut it immediately. We're going to do sort of reduced for 2 or 3 years. And I thought that was something that could be likely. Nobody's just going to shut it off immediately, except that this administration has targeted not only public media, but media in general in a lot of ways.
So at this point, is this change? How is this changing what you're doing or how you're doing things?
Well, it's not changing anything editorially how we produce programs. It's changing it's increasing our focus on fundraising, but in terms of news coverage or the programs we produce, it is not changing anything.
You won't have to do less?
Well, so I never want to say that it is business as usual or nothing has changed, because things have. And the two ways to address a funding gap are you raise more money or you spend less money. So we've certainly looked at managing expenses. We've made some hard decisions about things that we were planning to do, especially like some positions that we might have hired that we're not moving forward with at this time. So far, and what I really try and stress, is we have not had to make any cuts that affect what you see on the air or what you hear on the air. And we have not eliminated, we haven't let anybody go. We haven't done any layoffs, but we haven't cut back specific on-air programs. We've managed expenses elsewhere, and we're focused on raising more money. And we have had a strong outpouring of support. I don't want to say we're out of the woods or that it's over. We need to educate viewers and listeners that, especially those who have increased a little bit, that we're going to need you to do that in the future. We're off to a good start, but
that was my next question.
Yeah.
You have very loyal donors, a lot of, I assume a lot of them.
Yeah. More than ever.
Well, there you go. What have you heard from your donors as a result of these cuts?
One thing I think that this whole situation, this whole crisis has made me aware of is it's really focused attention on people realizing, oh, this could really happen. What would my life be like without PBS or NPR or Maine Public? We've always taken it for granted. I hear all the time, Maine Public is so important to me. Maine Public's all I watch. Maine Public is, maybe I don't watch it as much, but I'm glad it's there for my kids. I rely on the kind of public media, civil conversation and news coverage that I get. I get all kinds of positive messages of why people care about Maine Public. And this has really made people aware of, this really could go away. And by the way, tangential example, Arkansas is a state network like Maine Public. There's a PBS network that covers all of Arkansas. The Arkansas Public Television Commission has made the decision to disaffiliate from PBS, that they're not going to provide PBS programming. I think that's not a done deal, by the way. I hope they turn that around.
Politically motivated?
But exactly, and it has produced this huge outcry in Arkansas. So think of, you're watching your local PBS station, and your station tells you we're not going to bring you PBS programs anymore. We're only going to bring you your local shows. Sure, just like Maine Public, there are valuable local shows on PBS, but PBS is a partner. You wouldn't want to watch Maine Public only for our local programs. There's things you enjoy from PBS. In Arkansas, it's creating a lot of consternation that could go away.
I mean, at the heart of this, obviously some people don't want government spending money on anything. But I think at the heart of this has been a belief that NPR, and maybe to a lesser extent PBS, has political bias, and that the programming has been politically biased. From where you sit and your experience, do you think there's any validity to that?
So the first part of that, you said, some people don't want any government spending on this. And again, I acknowledge that is a fair conversation, and I insist that it's a good investment, it's good seed funding, it's good leverage. But I get the point that some people just don't think government should be in media, and I get that. The issue of bias, I think there is so much overheated political rhetoric about it that I tend not to use the word unbiased because everybody's got a bias of some kind. I do believe that what we and my national colleagues, I do believe that we're fact-based and we treat it as good journalism. I believe that there's been so much rhetoric that some of the bias is also, bias is two ways. The viewer and the listener may say, I don't like how this is covered, it's biased. It's so hard to say. I listen to NPR a lot in the morning with an ear to how are other people hearing this? Is there bias here, or is it as simple as, if you're a fan of the president, you're going to think this, and if you're an opponent of the president, you're going to think this? I do think that our coverage, first of all, I get that complaint a lot more about NPR nationally than about local Maine public journalism. But even the people who criticize NPR, we have people who complain that NPR is too conservative, that you're too nice on the administration. I used to work with PBS NewsHour in Washington, and I read the viewer mail every day. We got a lot of mail both ways, people complaining you're letting these guys get away with it, and people saying you're this or that. Jim Lehrer, by the way, used to say, Jim Lehrer used to say, if both sides are complaining, you're doing the right thing. I do think that the accusations of bias is a lot of overheated rhetoric. Not to say that there's no validity. And I think, too, in a state like Maine and in a rural area, it's easy to think that your media is not reflecting you locally. And that is a concern, I think, we pay attention to here in Maine, but I and my colleagues from less than major metro areas remind NPR and PBS about, we're really trying to be inclusive and reflective of the whole country, including rural and different kinds of areas. I think a lot of the focus on inclusion can sometimes be interpreted one way by NPR and a different way in rural areas, and we try to just remember what how we are in Maine and our populations and our rural areas. We want to see that too.
I was surprised a little bit when Senator Collins, I don't know if it was the night of the vote or the night before, made a speech that said or a press release anyway, that said she would favor defunding NPR, but not CPB or PBS. And I was surprised at that.
Yeah. So one of the things, and especially last summer during the political height of all this, I was always proud of saying that, remember, all 4 members of our delegation, and we have a diverse congressional delegation from Senator Collins to Senator King to Pingree and Golden, all 4 members of our delegation supported the idea of public broadcasting. I was grateful for that. You know, Senator Collins has publicly said, she believes in the value of local stations, and she had some concerns about NPR. And she and I have had that conversation, and I get where she's coming from.
I figured you probably
yeah, and no, and you know, I try and actually I take those concerns to heart and express, and that's why I think what we do locally at Maine Public is not the target of that so much as some NPR coverage. And you know, I'm in touch with NPR folks. I tell them where our concerns are. But no, I'm not surprised. I think Senator Collins is a strong supporter of local stations, not only here in Maine, but she knows of the value of them across the country, and her concerns were pretty much focused on NPR coverage.
So who knows what's going to happen when the next Congress is in, who knows what it's going to be, and then a future administrations. Do you think federal funding will eventually come back in some way?
I think the best possibility for there to be a role for federal funding is about infrastructure and providing local service so there are certainly, my national colleagues would say, well, the money has always been unrestricted and we should focus on that. I think we should. I think there is value in getting away from tying the content from in any kind of form to the appearance that it is supporting news coverage. And I think it should be about getting your signal on the air. So I think the best possibility for the future of federal funding is if there were a mechanism, a grant program, whatever, that says this is funding that helps local stations be on the air, and they have to pay for their programming and their news coverage and everything else through private sources. But I think infrastructure is still a good federal investment.
So a federal investment somewhat similar to what Maine does.
Absolutely, yeah. I would, you know, you ask if it will come back. Who knows? I have a lot of friends and donors who have said, oh, with the, you know, after the midterms or after a new administration, you know, who knows? I don't approach it that way. I make the case now and in the future that I think there's a good federal investment in infrastructure to be made, but we ought to be paying for our news coverage and our programming through our member dollars.
And speaking of investment,
yeah,
you're in the middle of a big one.
Yeah.
With this new building. No question, you're in a very crowded facility here.
Here we are.
Yeah, we had to go into a conference. Your office is the conference room in Portland. This is a big investment.
Yeah.
Am I correct that you bought the building? Yeah. Was it $20 million?
Yeah. So this is a big investment, and in the nonprofit world, when you talk about a new facility, you're talking about a capital campaign. Right. So the things that may be surprising to people, I have these conversations with donors, but in terms of public awareness of what's going on, I think people might be surprised at how far along we are and how successful we've been and where we are. Here are the basics. We bought the former home of the Portland Public Market. When we made that announcement, I sort of heard 3 messages from a lot of people. I love that I fondly remember that building. I used to go in there for lunch. I haven't been in that building since it's closed, and it's great that it's going to be public. A lot of people have said to me, I think Betty Noyce would have loved this idea. And Betty Noyce, the philanthropist who made the Lieber Foundation possible, she was actually on the MPBN board years ago. So people are very excited about the fact that we're going into the Portland Public Market building. When I came in 2021, this has been the priority of a Portland facility has been the priority of this organization for a long time. Yes. I came in knowing that we would have to accomplish this. There were plans to build a new building from the ground up for a lot of reasons, chiefly inflation, that became impractical, and when this opportunity became available, we jumped on it. So we acquired the building, and we are we're doing interior construction for new broadcast space and a community engagement space that is going to be great. We're going to be a player in activities downtown. The cost and what's associated with this campaign, we have a $31 million capital campaign goal, of which we have now just recently passed $29 million. So we're more than 90% towards our capital campaign goal.
That pays for buying it, renovating it.
And the key thing, when we pivoted to renovating an existing building as opposed to building a building from the ground up, the acquisition cost plus the project cost of the renovation had to add up to less than what building a new building would have cost us, and it did that. So $31 million capital campaign goal. You mentioned $20 million as the purchase price. I always feel like qualifying that is the public purchase price that is on the official rolls. It's actually my net acquisition, my view of the net acquisition cost of the building is less than that, because there were leases and some payments involved to get for people who wanted to get out of their lease. So it didn't really cost us $20 million, it cost us more like $16 million. But basically, the $31 million capital campaign goal will cover both buying the building and doing the interior construction. And one more note about the finances of this, because it's important and people don't always realize this. We paid $16 to $20 million to acquire this building. We were able to do that because of the success of the capital campaign so far, and there is no debt on that building. We bought it outright. There's not a mortgage. In your personal life, you probably wouldn't leverage that kind of money, but we're in it for the long haul. We're not going to resell this building. So it is very important that we bought this building with no debt, and when we're done building it, all we're going to have to do is operate it. We're not going to have debt service to pay off.
And there will be all of the money coming from donations.
That is such a key point. We purposely never went for any kind of government grant, state or federal, to put into this building. It's entirely paid for by private money. And so when this elimination of federal funding happened, I stressed to people, that doesn't affect the building project. There is no federal or state money that is making this building possible.
But that does lead me to the other question I wanted to ask, is the fact that you're in the middle of a $31 million project, at the same time that this federal cut comes along and creates concerns. Is that awkward?
It helps a lot that we're so far along and frankly almost done. This building's going to open next summer. And again, we've done more than 90% of the fundraising we have to do with it. I think the federal funding situation is helping us with the tail end of that campaign. It's raised awareness. I would be much more concerned, fearful, if we were in the first 10% of a capital campaign and then the last 10%. I think it would be hard to launch a capital campaign today under this circumstance. But again, a capital campaign helps a nonprofit's overall awareness and fundraising, and I think this, I don't want to say that everything has worked out so well, but we are navigating this pretty well with the capital campaign.
I guess I was thinking in some respects more from a PR point of view. On one hand, you're not crying poor me, but on one hand, geez, we're getting this federal cut, but on the other hand, we're going to have this new shiny, very visible.
And I think that's why communication and education and frankly transparency about all this is so important. We make very clear to folks that, capital campaign donations are exactly that. They're about paying for the building. We hope that you'll still support the programming, and that the federal funding has created this big challenge for our programming, our operational fundraising. It has nothing to do with the capital campaign. That is sometimes hard for people to get their arms around, but we really, we try and be very transparent and communicative about it.